Have you ever looked someone in the eye and felt something was off, not because of what they said, but because of what they did not say? That quiet feeling of unease, when your mind is nodding along but your gut is raising a silent flag, is often your first encounter with the psychology of lying. We tend to think lying is a rare event, something reserved for criminals, cheaters, or con artists. But psychological research paints a very different picture. According to social psychologists, most people lie at least once a day. These aren't just dramatic, life-altering lies. Many of them are what we call white lies. Telling a friend you love their cooking when it tastes like cardboard. Claiming you're almost there when you're still in bed. Pretending to agree in a meeting just to avoid confrontation. These everyday falsehoods are subtle, but they reveal how deeply deception is woven into human behavior. The psychology of lying goes beyond words. It reaches into our motives, our fears, and the way we construct identity. When someone lies, they are often trying to control a perception, either of themselves or the situation. This control is not always sinister. Sometimes we lie to protect others, to preserve peace, or to avoid shame. Yet even in these moments, something deep is at play within the human mind. Lying activates specific regions in the brain, including the prefrontal cortex, which handles decision-making, and the amygdala, which processes emotion. When someone chooses to lie, the brain must work harder. It must suppress the truth, invent an alternative, and monitor the reaction of the person being deceived. This cognitive load creates tension, which can leak out in the form of micro-expressions, subtle hesitations, or even physiological changes like a raised heart rate. These cues are often unconscious, yet they form the basis of how experts in detecting deception identify when someone is not being truthful. Despite all of this, most people are terrible at spotting lies. In fact, studies show that the average person can detect lies with about the same accuracy as flipping a coin. We believe we are good at reading people, but our brains are biased toward believing what others say. This is called the truth bias, and it explains why skilled liars often go undetected. Our desire to believe others, to preserve harmony, often blinds us to the subtle signs of deception. Still, the psychology of lying is not just about behavior. It is about identity. The lies we tell shape the image we present to the world, and sometimes even the image we believe about ourselves. This becomes especially clear in cases of self-deception, where people convince themselves of something they know, at a deeper level, is not true. Whether it is denying responsibility for a mistake, justifying an unethical choice, or clinging to an illusion of perfection, self-deception is one of the most complex and dangerous forms of lying. We also have to consider the social function of lies. In close relationships, lies can serve as both shields and weapons. People may lie to protect a loved one's feelings or to hide something they fear would break the relationship. These lies are emotional, and they often come with a heavy psychological cost. The emotional manipulation behind some forms of deception can leave deep wounds, especially when trust is broken. The closer we are to someone, the more vulnerable we are to their lies, and the harder it becomes to see them clearly. Philosophers have long grappled with the tension between truth and deception. Nietzsche once suggested that people do not want to hear the truth because they do not want their illusions destroyed. In modern life, where appearances are carefully curated and social interactions are filtered through digital screens, this idea feels more relevant than ever. How often do you find yourself editing your words, hiding your true emotions, or playing a role just to fit in? The psychology of lying is not about labeling people as good or bad. It is about understanding what lies beneath the lie. What was the need that wasn't met? What fear was trying to be avoided? What truth felt too dangerous to speak? As you think about your own experiences, moments when you've lied, Or when you felt someone lied to you, ask yourself this: what did that lie reveal about what you or the other person needed at that moment? I'm curious. When was the last time someone lied to you and you knew, but said nothing? What did you feel, and what did you do with that feeling? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read your story. The psychology of lying is not a surface-level behavior. It is a cognitive operation that takes root deep within the architecture of the brain. When someone chooses to lie, they are not just manipulating facts. They are initiating a neurological sequence that demands memory suppression, emotional control, and strategic calculation. This decision ignites specific areas of the brain, and those regions reveal exactly why lying feels tense, unnatural, and psychologically taxing for most people. One of the most critical regions involved in lying is the prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain manages executive functions, which include problem-solving, decision-making, and impulse control. In the act of lying, the prefrontal cortex must hold two competing realities at once, the truth and the false version being fabricated. It then has to suppress the truth while constructing a believable alternative. This mental balancing act produces what psychologists refer to as cognitive load. The more detailed and sustained a lie, the heavier that load becomes. Another important structure is the anterior cingulate cortex, which is responsible for conflict detection. When we lie, this region lights up, signaling an internal alarm that something does not match. The brain senses the contradiction between what we know and what we are about to say. This mismatch creates mental tension, which is why even the smallest lie can leave a noticeable trace in tone, body language, or behavior. It is not just the lie itself that matters, but the mental gymnastics required to maintain it. The emotional toll of lying can often be traced to the amygdala, the brain's emotional response center. For most people, lying triggers anxiety and guilt, which are processed through this region. These emotional spikes can result in physical reactions like sweating, shallow breathing, or a sudden rise in heart rate. However, studies have shown that frequent liars often show a reduced amygdala response over time. As they continue to lie, they gradually become less sensitive to the emotional discomfort that lying typically creates. This adaptation is known as emotional desensitization, and it makes some individuals appear surprisingly calm and confident while deceiving others. The psychology of lying also intersects with the phenomenon of self-deception. Some people do not just lie to others. They lie to themselves. They convince themselves of altered realities, not because they are evil or manipulative, but because the truth feels too difficult to accept. This is especially common in situations involving regret, shame, or failure. Rather than admit painful truths, the brain subtly rewrites the narrative, offering emotional relief in exchange for accuracy. In this way, self-deception becomes a psychological defense mechanism. Neuroimaging studies using functional MRI have shown how lying creates measurable changes in brain activity. Researchers have observed that the act of deception activates more regions of the brain than telling the truth. Truth is simple. It requires access to memory. Lying requires memory plus fabrication, plus emotion management, plus constant monitoring of the other person's reactions. All of these moving parts are why lying is harder than truth-telling, not just ethically, but biologically. This complexity is one reason why detecting deception remains so difficult. Many people believe they can tell when someone is lying based on body language cues like fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, or inconsistent speech. But research shows that these behaviors are unreliable indicators. A person might avoid eye contact because they feel nervous or insecure, even when telling the truth. Meanwhile, a skilled liar may exhibit complete composure. The signs of lying are often subtle, and they are easier to interpret when you understand the psychological mechanisms operating beneath the surface. The psychology of lying forces us to rethink our assumptions. It shows us that lying is not just about words. It is about internal conflict, emotional suppression, and the limits of memory. It is a full-body experience encoded into brain chemistry. And while technology continues to evolve methods for lie detection, from polygraphs to AI-driven facial recognition, none of them have yet mastered the complexity of human deception. What lies beneath the surface is too rich, too personal, too alive. Understanding what happens in the brain when we lie is more than a study in neuroscience. It is a mirror. It reflects the fragile relationship we have with truth, not just with others, but within ourselves. The psychology of lying did not emerge with the invention of language or civilization. It began long before that, rooted in the basic instincts of survival. Deception, in its most primitive form, is not unique to humans. Across the natural world, organisms mimic, camouflage, and manipulate perception to gain an advantage. The butterfly that imitates a poisonous species, the predator that hides in silence until the moment it strikes, the animal that plays dead to avoid harm. These are all early expressions of lying. Deception evolved because it worked. It provided a selective edge. And in humans, it matured into something far more intricate. As human societies developed, so did the need for complex social strategies. Living in groups meant navigating loyalty, dominance, jealousy, and cooperation. The ability to deceive, to withhold or distort information for personal gain, became not just a survival tactic but a social skill. In evolutionary psychology, this is known as Machiavellian intelligence. The idea that managing relationships and reputations is a form of cognitive sophistication. The psychology of lying is deeply tied to this concept, because deception in humans is rarely about brute survival. It is about influence. Anthropological studies have shown that even children begin to lie at a very early age. Before the age of 5, many children understand that words can be used not just to describe reality, but to reshape it. They experiment with denial, exaggeration, and excuses. Not because they are morally corrupt, but because they are discovering the power of perception. Lying becomes a cognitive milestone. It signals the child's growing awareness that other people have separate minds, separate beliefs, and that those beliefs can be manipulated. In adult life, this early skill is sharpened by culture. Society rewards performance, confidence, and likability. Often, being completely transparent is seen as naive or even dangerous. In certain social or professional settings, honesty can cost relationships, jobs, or reputations. So we learn to present curated versions of ourselves. We highlight some truths, downplay others, and occasionally cross the line into fabrication. This evolution of lying reflects not a decline in moral character but an adaptation to social expectations. The psychology of lying in modern life is no longer just about telling falsehoods. It is about managing identity. People lie on dating profiles, in job interviews, on resumes, in online comments, and even on social media captions. These lies may be small, but they are strategic. They are used to create impressions, to craft a public persona, or to avoid judgment. What was once a biological instinct to escape harm has now become a daily act of social editing. And this is where lying begins to wear a psychological mask. It is not just about avoiding detection. It becomes about becoming someone else. Over time, if a person lies frequently enough to maintain a version of themselves that feels acceptable or admirable, they may begin to lose touch with who they actually are. This internal fragmentation creates emotional stress. The dissonance between the real self and the portrayed self can lead to anxiety, depression, and even identity confusion. Philosophers have long wrestled with this tension. The ancient Greek word for truth, aletheia, means uncovering or Revealing. It suggests that truth is not something created, but something uncovered from beneath layers of illusion. When we lie, we add another layer to that illusion. We drift further from the core of what is real. Jean-Paul Sartre described bad faith as the act of lying to oneself in order to avoid existential responsibility. When someone hides behind a social mask, they are not just deceiving others, they are also avoiding the responsibility of being truly seen. The psychology of lying reveals that our minds are not always aligned with our values. We might believe in honesty, yet find ourselves distorting the truth to maintain connection, status, or comfort. These behaviors are not accidents. They are evolutionary echoes, shaped by centuries of trial and error, reinforced by the demands of modern life. Lying has followed us from the caves to the boardroom, from the wild to the algorithm. What began as camouflage is now coded into speech, appearance, and even digital identity. And though we may no longer lie to escape predators, we still lie to escape vulnerability. Understanding this evolution helps us see lying not simply as a moral failure, but as a human response to pressure. The real challenge is not to eliminate deception entirely, but to become conscious of when, why, and how it arises, both in others and within ourselves. The psychology of lying cannot be fully understood without exploring its many forms. Not all lies carry the same weight. Some are whispered in kindness. Others are calculated for advantage. Some are told without thought. Others are rehearsed with intention. The type of lie a person tells often reveals more about their internal world than the words they speak. One of the most common types is the white lie. These are the polite fabrications we offer to preserve feelings, avoid awkwardness, or maintain social grace. When someone says they love your haircut even though they do not, or when a parent tells a child that a broken toy is sleeping instead of gone, these are not intended to harm. They are designed to soothe. Yet even these small lies reveal our sensitivity to emotional discomfort, our fear of conflict, and our instinct to protect harmony. Then there are lies of omission. These are not direct falsehoods, but carefully crafted silences. A person might leave out key details, hoping others will fill in the blanks with assumptions. These lies are often used in relationships, where telling part of the truth feels safer than revealing the whole. The psychology of lying through omission is rooted in fear, the fear of losing love, respect, or trust. It allows the liar to feel technically honest while still controlling the narrative. Exaggeration is another form of lying, often hiding in plain sight. It is the tendency to stretch the truth for effect, to make a story more dramatic or one's achievements more impressive. This type of lie usually comes from insecurity. The desire to be admired or accepted can push someone to inflate their reality. The deeper need behind exaggeration is validation. The truth feels too ordinary to earn attention, so it is dressed in brighter colors. Denial is one of the most psychologically complex forms of lying. In denial, the person resists accepting a painful truth, not just outwardly, but internally. A person may deny a loved one's betrayal, their own addiction, or the failure of a dream, not because they are trying to deceive others, but because they are unable to confront the emotional impact. This form of self-deception creates a temporary illusion of safety, but over time it can isolate the individual from reality and hinder emotional growth. Fabrication, on the other hand, is the creation of a completely false story. This type of lie is often intentional, used to manipulate, mislead, or control. It can appear in small, everyday scenarios or in larger, more destructive patterns such as fraud or pathological lying. What makes fabrication especially harmful is that it requires a sustained commitment to unreality. The liar must not only create a fiction, but continually reinforce it. Over time, the psychological strain of maintaining these falsehoods can erode mental stability and damage relationships. There is also a darker form of lying known as gaslighting. This is a manipulative tactic in which a person systematically denies another's reality in order to gain power or control. In gaslighting, the lie is not just about facts. It is about perception. The goal is to make the other person question their own memory, judgment, or sanity. This type of emotional manipulation is often used in abusive relationships and can have long-term effects on a person's self-trust and psychological health. Each type of lie is a mirror, reflecting the liar's motives, insecurities, and values. When someone tells a white lie, they may be seeking peace. When they exaggerate, they may be craving recognition. When they omit, they may be protecting themselves from shame. The psychology of lying is not one-dimensional. It adapts to context. It evolves with the needs of the moment. But what makes this even more interesting is that most people do not categorize their lies as deception. They rationalize. They reframe. They use phrases like, "It wasn't a big deal," or "I was just trying to help." In doing so, they avoid the moral discomfort of acknowledging the lie. This is where cognitive dissonance becomes active. The brain reduces psychological tension by altering the way the situation is interpreted. This creates a version of truth that feels more tolerable, even if it is less accurate. By becoming aware of the types of lies we tell and the reasons behind them, we can begin to confront our own patterns. We can begin to ask deeper questions. What am I afraid would happen if I told the truth? What am I trying to protect? What am I trying to avoid? The psychology of lying is not just about spotting deceit in others. It is about understanding the subtle, often invisible, lies we live with daily, and deciding which of them we are ready to let go of. If understanding the psychology of lying helps us grasp why people lie, the next logical step is asking whether it is possible to tell when someone is lying. This question has fascinated scientists, law enforcement, and everyday people alike. The desire to detect deception is universal. We want to believe we can spot a lie when it is told to our face. But the truth is far more nuanced. Despite the popular belief that liars give themselves away with obvious cues, research has shown that detecting deception is much more complicated than most people assume. Behavioral science has revealed certain patterns that may emerge during a lie, but none of them are reliable on their own. That is because human behavior is messy. It is shaped by stress, personality, culture, and context. One of the most well-known ideas in lie detection involves microexpressions. These are fleeting facial expressions that last only a fraction of a second. Pioneered by psychologist Paul Ekman, the theory suggests that these involuntary expressions can reveal a person's true feelings before they have a chance to suppress them. For example, someone claiming to be calm might briefly show fear or contempt. In theory, catching that moment could expose the lie. But in practice, reading microexpressions requires intense training, and even professionals can misinterpret what they see. Other common cues include changes in voice pitch, pauses in speech, and inconsistent storytelling. Some people become overly detailed to sound convincing. Others offer too little information in an attempt to stay vague and avoid detection. There may be shifts in posture, nervous gestures, or a forced smile. But the challenge lies in the fact that these behaviors are not exclusive to liars. Honest people who feel nervous, anxious, or intimidated might exhibit the same traits. This is where the psychology of lying intersects with the psychology of perception. Our own biases shape how we interpret behavior. If you already suspect someone is lying, you are more likely to notice things that confirm that belief, even if they are innocent. This is known as confirmation bias. On the other hand, if you trust someone deeply, you might overlook glaring inconsistencies simply because you do not want to face the possibility that they are deceiving you. This is the foundation of the truth bias, the tendency to believe others are telling the truth by default. Lie detection becomes even more difficult when the person lying is emotionally intelligent. Skilled liars are often adept at reading the emotions of others and adjusting their behavior to avoid suspicion. They mimic authenticity. They use charm, empathy, and strategic vulnerability. They may admit to a small fault to gain your trust, only to hide a much larger deception behind it. This tactic plays on your instinct to reward honesty, even when it is only partial. Despite decades of research, no behavioral sign has proven universally reliable in detecting deception. This has led experts to shift their approach. Instead of focusing on isolated cues, they look for clusters of behavior. Inconsistencies across different modes of communication, what is said versus how it is said, tone versus body language, are often more revealing than any single gesture. The psychology of lying teaches us that deception is context-dependent. A person's baseline behavior matters. If someone normally speaks quickly and becomes unusually slow, that change may be significant. But without knowing their baseline, it is difficult to interpret the shift. This is why law enforcement agents trained in detecting deception spend time building rapport first. They need to observe what normal looks like before they can spot what deviates. What this all points to is the humbling truth that there is no perfect lie detector. Technology has tried to bridge the gap with polygraphs, voice analysis, and facial recognition software, but even these tools have limits. A polygraph does not detect lies. It measures physiological responses like heart rate and sweat. Those responses can be triggered by fear, embarrassment, or even a strong dislike of being questioned, none of which prove dishonesty. Perhaps the most powerful tool we have for recognizing lies is not a gadget or a technique, but attention. The psychology of lying reminds us that people often reveal themselves in the spaces between words. The momentary hesitation, the answer that avoids the actual question, the shift in narrative when pressure increases. These moments are subtle, but they are often where the truth tries to break through. The goal is not to become paranoid or cynical. It is to become observant. It is to understand that deception is not always malicious, but it is always meaningful. Every lie reveals something, whether about the person telling it or the dynamic in which it occurs. The psychology of lying is not just about the person telling the lie. It is just as much about the person hearing it. For all our interest in deception, humans are remarkably poor at detecting it. On average, most people can only identify lies at a slightly better rate than chance. Despite years of experience in relationships, work, and social interaction, our ability to tell truth from fiction remains surprisingly fragile. One reason lies in the way we are wired to believe. From an early age, we are taught that honesty is good, and that people generally mean what they say. This belief becomes the foundation of communication. Without it, conversation would collapse under the weight of constant suspicion. This tendency to trust what we hear is known as the truth bias. It is the default assumption that people are telling the truth unless there is overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The truth bias serves an important social function. It allows interactions to flow smoothly. It helps build connections, especially in environments that require cooperation and emotional safety. But it also makes us vulnerable. When we expect honesty, we stop scrutinizing. We relax our awareness. This is why some of the most convincing lies are told not with clever words, but with warmth, charm, and sincerity. The psychology of lying reminds us that belief is not purely logical. It is emotional. When someone we care about lies, we often miss it because we do not want to see it. Detecting deception in a loved one can bring emotional pain, fear, or a loss of security. In many cases, people subconsciously avoid noticing lies because accepting the truth would mean confronting something uncomfortable. This emotional resistance is often tied to self-deception. When we suspect someone is lying but choose to believe them anyway, we are not just protecting the relationship, we are protecting our own sense of reality. Facing the lie would require action. It might force a difficult conversation, a reevaluation of trust, or even the end of something we value. So instead, the mind rewrites the narrative. It frames inconsistencies as misunderstandings, rationalizes strange behavior, or dismisses gut feelings as paranoia. In doing so, it preserves stability, even at the cost of truth. Psychologists have also identified another factor that interferes with lie detection: projection. This occurs when people assume that others think and behave the way they do. Honest people tend to believe others are also honest. Deceptive individuals, on the other hand, may be more suspicious because they assume others are also hiding something. This creates a blind spot. If you see the world through your own moral lens, you may miss cues that point in a different direction. Another reason we struggle to detect lies is that our intuition is often misinformed. Pop culture has taught us that liars avoid eye contact, fidget, or shift in their seats. But these behaviors can also be signs of nervousness, not dishonesty. At the same time, someone who lies frequently may appear completely composed. Their behavior does not trigger suspicion because they have learned how to perform authenticity. The psychology of lying reveals that confidence is not proof of truth, and discomfort is not evidence of deception. Our minds are also influenced by cognitive shortcuts. When someone provides an explanation that fits our expectations, we tend to accept it without further scrutiny. If their story sounds plausible, if their emotions appear genuine, we believe them. This mental shortcut, known as heuristic processing, allows us to make quick judgments, but it often overlooks deeper inconsistencies. All of these psychological factors, the truth bias, emotional resistance, projection, and cognitive shortcuts, combine to create a mental environment where lies can thrive. This does not mean that people are naive or unintelligent. It means that belief is not just a rational decision. It is shaped by attachment, emotion, and context. The psychology of lying teaches us that trust is a beautiful vulnerability. It is what allows intimacy, cooperation, and meaning to flourish. But it also creates openings for deception. The better we understand how belief works, the more mindful we can become of the delicate balance between openness and awareness. No one wants to live in constant suspicion. But cultivating a quiet attentiveness, learning to notice when something feels slightly misaligned, can help us navigate truth and deception with more clarity and compassion. Sometimes, being able to tell when someone is lying begins not with reading them, but with understanding ourselves. The psychology of lying reveals not only how and why people deceive but also what it costs them. Every lie, no matter how subtle or strategic, carries a psychological burden. While some lies dissolve quietly into the flow of daily life, others accumulate. They grow in silence. They dig into memory and identity. And over time, they begin to alter the way a person sees themselves and the world around them. Lying demands mental effort, but what often goes unnoticed is the emotional toll it leaves behind. In the short term, a lie may provide relief. It may avoid conflict, spare feelings, or delay consequences. But over time, repeated deception creates internal conflict. That conflict, if left unresolved, turns into anxiety, guilt, or chronic stress. The body remembers. The mind replays. The emotional cost does not disappear just because the lie remains hidden. When a person lies frequently, they begin to live in dual awareness. They hold the truth in one hand and the deception in the other. This split requires constant management. It requires remembering what was said, who was told, and how the lie must be protected. The psychological strain of this fragmentation can lead to emotional fatigue. Even small lies can compound into a persistent sense of being out of alignment with oneself. One of the deepest consequences of lying is the erosion of self-trust. A person who lies, especially to those they care about, often feels a rupture within. They become unsure of their own integrity. Even if no one else discovers the truth, the internal sense of inconsistency grows. The self begins to doubt itself. Over time, that doubt can lead to shame, and shame has a way of isolating people not just from others, but from their own inner clarity. The psychology of lying also shows how deception reshapes relationships. Trust, once broken, is rarely restored to its original form. When someone discovers they have been lied to, the betrayal does not just damage the content of the relationship, it damages the foundation. It calls into question every past word, every shared moment. It forces the other person to reevaluate not just the lie, but the very character of the person who told it. This is why lies in close relationships often hurt more than the truth would have. Philosophically, the act of lying challenges our concept of what it means to be moral. If morality is rooted in truth, then deception becomes a violation not only of honesty, but of meaning itself. Yet lying also forces us to confront moral complexity. Is a lie always wrong? What if it protects someone? What if the truth would cause more harm? These questions do not have easy answers. Ethical frameworks like consequentialism, which judges the rightness of an action by its outcome, may justify certain lies. But deontological ethics, which focuses on duty and principle, sees truth-telling as a moral imperative, regardless of the result. In psychological terms, the more a person justifies their lies, the more they distort their moral compass. Rationalization becomes a slippery slope. A person begins to tell themselves that their actions are harmless, even noble. But beneath that self-narrative lies a discomfort that grows each time the gap between values and actions widens. This is the hidden cost of lying, the internal dissonance that builds when someone knows they are not being who they claim to be. Lying can also lead to a loss of meaning. When truth is repeatedly sacrificed, reality itself becomes unstable. A person who builds a life on deception begins to wonder what is real and what is performance. This is not just philosophical, it is deeply psychological. Without an anchor of truth, the sense of identity becomes fragmented. Authenticity becomes harder to access. And eventually, the person may find themselves unable to recognize what they truly feel or believe. The psychology of lying is a study in human fragility. It shows how our desire to be accepted, protected, or admired can lead us to compromise truth. But it also shows that truth is not merely a moral rule, it is a form of nourishment. It is what gives relationships strength, what grounds us in reality, and what allows us to stand in alignment with who we are. Every lie may offer a shortcut, but every truth offers a mirror. And in that mirror, there is something powerful, even redemptive, about facing ourselves without illusion. The psychology of lying is not simply about catching others in untruths. It is about understanding the silent tensions we all carry. Every lie begins in fear, the fear of rejection, of judgment, of pain. But truth is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to face it. We lie to protect others, but often we are protecting ourselves. We lie to control perception, but we lose control of our own identity. And sometimes we lie so well we forget where the truth even lives. Yet in the quiet moments, when the world is still and our performances pause, we know. We know the difference between the mask and the face, between connection and illusion, between saying what feels safe and saying what feels real. The most meaningful relationships we build are not based on perfection. They are built on truth. Raw, unpolished, sometimes painful, but true. That truth is what allows trust to grow. It is what helps us see each other clearly. And it is what frees us from the exhausting task of pretending. So maybe the most powerful skill you can develop is not spotting a lie in someone else, but recognizing the one you tell yourself. Let this not be a video you simply watch, but one you reflect on. Ask yourself, where in your life does truth still have to be spoken? Because honesty is not weakness. It is a kind of strength that cannot be faked.